There are chairs that invite conversation. And then there was Johnny Carson's chair, a seemingly comfortable place that surprisingly often became a confessional. For decades, Johnny sat at the center of late-night America, a genial gatekeeper who could coax a laugh, steer a moment, or, when it went too far, slice the air with a practice pause and signal the commercial break. Most nights, The Tonight Show delivered tidy entertainment. A promo, a joke, a soft anecdote. But sometimes television was interrupted by something raw, a human confession that didn't fit the neat boxes of broadcast standards. Tonight, we revisit 6 guests who refused to play by the rules. They didn't just have no filter, they were too honest, and television had never quite known how to handle that. 1. Shelley Winters, the Hollywood bedpost who named names. Imagine an Academy Award winner leaning forward with a surprising ease and casually turning gossip into public record. Shelley Winters did that. On Johnny's couch, she didn't flirt, she confessed. In an era when women's sexual histories were supposed to be muted, Winters spoke with a conversational audacity. She told stories, laughed at herself, and most explosively named famous lovers on national television. She offered no apologies. Her tone was proud, amused, precise. Why it mattered. Winters's candor did something television had avoided for decades. It took rumor and made it testimony. When a respected actress casually confirmed relationships that had previously lived only in whispers, she undercut the entertainment business's code of silence. The ripple was cultural. Winters's unembarrassed ownership of her sexuality subtly challenged a double standard. Men's sexual adventures had long been comic bluster. For a woman of her stature to treat that same territory as anecdote was revolutionary. Carson's reaction was part of the performance. Widened eyes, an attempt to steer the conversation, a nervous laugh that said as much as any line of dialogue. That visible discomfort gave viewers permission to feel scandalized and thrilled at once. Winters didn't just push the boundary. She redrew it, showing audiences that celebrity lives could be spoken about plainly and without necessarily moralizing. Epilogue, Winters' on-air bluntness added fuel to an emerging era of public honesty. Kiss-and-tell memoirs and confessional interviews would soon become staples. Winters's appearances were early, stubborn matches striking in the dark. 2. Richard Pryor, turning trauma into truth and risky humor. If anyone transformed the mechanics of a late-night interview, it was Richard Pryor. Pryor's comedy always carried an edge. He mined the painful as well as the absurd. But on Carson's show, he crossed from provocative to profoundly personal, and television struggled with how to handle it. Pryor talked about his drug binges, police harassment, systemic racism, and the night he nearly burned himself alive while freebasing cocaine. He described the moment with a grotesque candor that was both funny and unbearable. Why it mattered, Pryor and his material didn't exist for shock value alone. He offered testimony, the kind of raw first-person account that mainstream television typically sanitized to the point of meaninglessness. When Pryor joked about setting his face on fire, the joke landed somewhere between comedy and confession. For white audiences and used to this kind of unflinching testimony, it was electric and uncomfortable. Carson had to perform 2 roles at once, host and guardian of broadcast norms. He laughed with Pryor, but he was also aware of the network's bigger obligations. That tension between recognizing Pryor's truth and protecting the show from FCC scrutiny created the most electrifying moments. Pryor's honesty forced viewers to confront an uglier, more complex American story than the one usually packaged for primetime. Epilogue, Pryor expanded what comedy, and therefore late-night television, could hold. Trauma, systemic critique, and personal survival. He influenced generations of comedians who saw humor as a way to bear witness. 3. Joan Rivers, the woman who made the backlit public. Joan Rivers arrived with a different kind of honesty. She had access and the audacity to use it. Rivers didn't hint. She named names, described plastic surgery in blunt terms, and joked about backstage sex and betrayals, as if reciting the evening's headlines. Her insider perspective made gossip feel less like rumor and more like reportage. Why it mattered. Rivers transformed gossip into mainstream entertainment. She told stories that publicists had spent decades burying, and because she'd been in the room, her anecdotes carried weight. When she described celebrities' private behavior with specifics, not blind items but named examples, she punctured Hollywood's carefully maintained mythologies. That specificity made celebrities vulnerable in ways talk shows rarely permitted. Carson, once again, became the barometer on screen. His discomfort, frozen expressions, and subtle attempts to shift the conversation amplified the tension. Audiences watched the gap between a star's crafted public image and the messy private truth fill in front of them. Epilogue. Rivers' brand of candid showmanship anticipated the tabloid TV boom and the later reality TV hunger for behind-the-scenes authenticity. She normalized audiences' appetite for being let in on what used to be off-limits. For Zsa Gabor, European glamour, unapologetic sexuality, Zsa Gabor brought a different flavor of honesty, continental candor, dramatic flair, and a gleeful refusal to be shamed for her romantic life. With theatrical timing, a flirtatious manner, and a laugh that said she knew precisely the effect she was having, Gabor turned hairstyle and husband count into spectacle. She treated multiple marriages and lovers like a resume of romantic achievements, and she was unapologetic. Why it mattered. At a time when television insisted on modesty for women, especially older women, Gabor's open celebration of her sexuality was jarring and liberating. Her performance wasn't mere provocation. It came from a worldview that treated sex and romance as normal adult pursuits, not scandalous detours. By refusing to adopt a desexualized public face as she aged, she modeled an alternative. Desire and glamour do not expire. Carson's on-air unease, the small laugh, the raised eyebrow, made viewers negotiate their own preconceptions. Many were delighted, many felt unsettled. That tension was the whole point. Epilogue. Gabor's unapologetic frankness helped shift how mature women's sexuality could be discussed in public, carving out room for later, more open conversations about love and aging. 5. Red Fox, unfiltered black perspective and racial candor. Red Fox carried something else into the studio, a mode of expression cultivated in black nightclubs and communities, now pushed into predominantly white living rooms. Fox's jokes were bawdy and unsparing. His commentary on race and sexuality cut past the polite evasions that television reserved for difficult topics. He challenged double standards and laughed in the face of the network's customary caution. Why it mattered. Fox did not soften himself for white viewers. Instead, he insisted on being heard as he was. That insistence exposed television's habit of requiring black performers to code switch, to muzzle or reshape themselves for mainstream consumption. Fox refused that compromise. His jokes and comments forced networks, hosts, and audiences to confront racial realities usually left unspoken. Carson's blushes and the audience's gasps were not merely entertainment. They were a mirror. The discomfort in the studio reflected a society that preferred some conversations stay private despite their urgency. Epilogue. Fox opened doors for more authentic black voices on television. The precedent he set made future comedians and performers less willing to dilute their perspectives for white comfort. 6. Oliver Reed, the dangerous guest who brought unpredictability. There are guests who are merely provocative. Then there are guests who make the air itself feel dangerous. Oliver Reed was the latter. Intoxicated, aggressive, and wildly candid, Reed's behavior looked less like a calculated interview and more like a live performance of volatility. He flirted offensively, challenged other guests, and gave the impression that anything on that set might spill out of control. Why it mattered. Reed exposed a vulnerability in the television machine. Most guests arrive rehearsed, shielded by PR, and briefed on what topics to avoid. Reed refused all that. His unpredictability revealed a truth networks rarely encountered. Live human behavior can't always be managed by questions and practice smiles. That sense of danger, the possibility of a physical or emotional rupture, made television feel raw and immediate rather than polished product. Carson's skill as host was tested in these moments. He had to weigh entertainment value against the safety and dignity of the broadcast, occasionally needing to step in or deflect. Backstage stories, like Shelley Winters throwing a drink after an off-camera altercation, showed the real-world consequences of refusing to sanitize human messiness. Epilogue. Reed's appearances foreshadowed the modern appetite for real unpredictability in entertainment, the same quality reality TV later packaged and monetized. What connects these 6 guests is not merely shock value. Each forced television to accommodate something it had previously excluded. Frank female sexuality narrated by a woman of stature, a comedian turning trauma into testimony, a gossiper naming names from inside the hallways of power, a glamorous European refusing shame, a black comedian refusing code switching, a guest whose volatility exposed the limits of control. Together, these moments nudged the culture. Television was not merely a mirror, but a teacher. It told audiences what could be spoken aloud. By breaking the rules, these guests expanded the domain of what late-night talk shows could contain, and in doing so, they helped loosen the rules themselves. Carson's role was complicated. He was at once a genial enabler of talk and the institutional bouncer who could, when necessary, call the break. That balancing act is part of his legacy. He allowed some extraordinary moments to land while keeping the program afloat. These episodes also reveal the cost of honesty on national television. Some guests paid little price, others faced professional blowback, public scandal, or the private toll of dredging up trauma on a stage. But honesty on these terms mattered because it made public what had been privately consequential. It created cultural conversations that otherwise might have stayed in the shadows. Television, in its neat 3-act segments and scheduled breaks, trains us to expect tidy entertainment. But history remembers the nights when that tidy structure was ruptured by truth, the nights the confessions, testimonies, and raw human unpredictability landed in living rooms across America. Those moments made viewers uncomfortable, fascinated, outraged, and sometimes more honest themselves. The Tonight Show was supposed to be comfortable. These guests refused comfort. And for a few charged minutes, television felt less like a polished product and more like the messy, complicated thing it always had been. Human conversation, with all the bruising and brilliance that implies.